Hey everybody, Dan Fitzpatrick here, stockmarketmentor.com, and I want to look at Palantir. Sorry about all this choppy stuff, but this is, in fact, that. No, I'm going to keep it on. We were doing a lot of trading around this during the uptrend. Now the stock has rolled over. They reported earnings, company reported earnings after the bell. First of all, we'll just look at the weekly chart. This kind of gives you a better sense of what's going on. The stock really peaked when a lot of other stocks did last November. And you can see where this is the 40-day moving average or the 40-week moving average, that's the 200-day, and how this thing, like right here was the big C change because the stock falls through, goes down, and then comes back and is unable to get back above this. Okay. This is a big deal. Now we're looking at the weekly chart, so we ain't day trading here. But this is a big deal that the stock violated the 200-day moving average, and not by a little bit. Like this was a 21% pullback below the 200-day moving average. And then it rallies up back to it. And that is almost a 30% run and cannot get above it. So this is a big deal for the stock. Now, company reports earnings. This is what the stock looked like during the regular hours. This is the closing price at 146.03. Now, we go to include post-market. Bam. All right. Not much change. Not much change at all. Down just a little bit. You can see this wild, jiggly look back and forth. I watched the numbers coming across the tape, and it was just more interesting to me than anything else because when it gets right down to it, I'll say it, I really couldn't give a shit. I really don't care what the numbers are. What I care about is what the price does, what the market does, what the market thinks, and initially get a big move higher, probably right on the headline. The algorithms looked and said, "Oh, beat," and then more stuff comes down. They go the other way. Okay, then we get a nice little volatility squeeze here, almost an hour after the market closes, and then you get a move up, and then another move down. Can you say whipsaw? Sure, you can. So this stock is all over the place, but when it got right down to it, it just really hasn't changed that much. So what are these numbers? 159.97. It's actually, I just kind of wagged this, wild asterisk guessed it. This was the implied move that the options market makes, which is just the cost of a straddle. Buy the at the money call, buy the at the money put. How much does that cost? Bam, that's the cost of the straddle. Strap it up to the upside and to the downside. That's where the options market anticipates the maximum excursion will be. So the options market was looking for a big move in Palantir, but it's not getting it. So I think that this is a great example of what stocks do after they've peaked. They've come back down. Technically, this really sucks right here. Like this is in a really, really bad position. And so the best, if you happen to be long this stock, there's two things that would be really, really cool for you to do. First, the stock runs up here tomorrow morning. Second, you sell. That's it. This is the upside ceiling here at 160. I seriously doubt it's going to get up there. However, nobody asked me. The market didn't ask me. This may go to 5,872 tomorrow. We don't know. But the options market is saying that 160 is the ceiling for this. The options market is also saying 130, or we'll say 131 is the floor for this. So I think we can expect this to be trading within this range tomorrow and throughout the rest of the week. Now, there's such a thing called volatility crush, where the options market is anticipating a big move, so the price of calls and puts is really, really high. Then as soon as the numbers actually come out, and they have, that's when the price of options gets really, really cheap, really low. Why? because people know what the stock's doing. There's no more of an unknown. There's no longer an unknown out there to where traders feel like, well, shoot, man, if I'm selling this, if I'm selling these calls or if I'm selling these puts, I need to get a lot of money for them because I don't know what the stock's really going to do. Okay, once the stock makes its move, then a lot of that uncertainty is played out and the options prices will really, really contract heavy. One thing that you can do tomorrow, this is a little bit of kind of a pro tip. Okay, so you're not short or long, hopefully, long options going into this. If you are short, hopefully they're the 160 and the 130s. But let's say you're not. Then the idea is you've got an edge here when you know that this 160 is the ceiling, 130 is the floor. So if, for example, the stock starts to come back down and you're an option trader, sell some out of the money puts. On the other hand, if the stock starts to come back up here, then sell some out of the money calls. Maybe go not 160, maybe go 165, maybe not go 130, maybe go 125. But the stock really has to move a lot in order for you to make this counter trend trade. If it doesn't do that, then frankly, I just don't see much of a trade here. You can day trade it. And we do this. By the way, I'll be doing another live trading session on NVIDIA. And there's a couple other, I think it's Analog Digital, a couple other stocks. I'll be doing a live trading session in a few weeks. On the 20th, we've done several of these lately, and every single one of them, we've absolutely crushed it. We've made a lot of money. This one will be no different. So if you are interested in this, you have to have taken the 59-minute trader course. You can look at that on our website. I'm not pitching it here. If I was pitching this, you would know it because I would be really obvious about it. But if you have taken the 59-minute trader course, you are eligible to get in. So you'll probably be getting emails about this in the next probably couple weeks or something like that. But if you want to make money trading the opening rotation, you can do it with me. And again, I got a pretty darn good track record and I don't intend to screw it up this time. So anyway, that's all I got for you. And so I hope you guys have a great Hope you had a great day. Hope you have a great evening. Let's make the rest of the week a really nice one. Be thankful for all the gifts that we have. And if you don't know what gifts you have, think again because we actually all have a bunch of them, okay? All right, I'll see you.